Each of us at some point in time in our lives have experienced a pause in our life where things are not going the way that we anticipated they were. I think we all can reflect on that one because of COVID and what happened in 2020 relative to the fact that we all went into the pause in our lives. And the question is, how do we deal with that? And can we come out with a very positive experience and outcome rather than a negative one? And I'm really grateful to have Candy Arrington on the show today. Candy's a blogger, a writer, a speaker, and she's written a book called Life on Pause, Learning to Wait Well. And we're going to talk about how do we deal with those issues that put us into a pause in our life, and how can we come out ahead, not only for ourselves, but then able to touch the lives of others. So I hope that you're going to enjoy this. I think that you will. And please join us.
At the end of the day, it's not about what you have or even what you've accomplished. It's about what you've done with those accomplishments. It's about who you've lifted up, who you've made better. It's about what you've given back. Denzel Washington. Welcome to Inspire Vision. Our sole purpose is to elevate the lives of others and to inspire you to do the same.
Candy, welcome to the show. How are you doing?
Thank you. I'm fine. It's good to be with you today.
Good. I'm excited to have you on the show. We had a little problem once before, and so hopefully this one will go through okay with the Wi-Fi. Anyway, you've written a wonderful book. It's called Life on Pause, Learning to Wait Well. And I really, really love the whole concept of that. What brought you to this point to write a book like that?
It's a culmination of some life events that happened in the last 41 years for me and my husband. One of the first things was that we dealt with infertility. And so while all of our friends were having children and moving forward with that area of their life, we were on pause, we were on hold, and went through the process of lots of testing and surgeries and that kind of thing. And so, that was really our first touch of seeing that life always doesn't turn out the way we thought it would, and realizing that we're really not in control, and just trying to deal with that. And honestly, I did not deal with it well. I was very upset and jealous of friends who were not having any problem. And, it was a real learning time for me. And it was a time when my faith was tested to some extent. It changed my relationship with God, and it was stressful for our marriage. And so that was the first time that, we had a situation like that. And then, of course, there have been other things over the years. Several years ago, my husband lost his job, and he had worked for that company for about 30 years. And so it was unexpected. We were in the middle of a pretty extensive renovation of our house, a contractor supervised renovation. And suddenly we were without income, without the major portion of our income. And so, that was a season of waiting also. When it happened, within a couple of weeks, he had a new job, but then a year later, the project that he was hired for was put on hold indefinitely, and he lost his job again. And then we began an 8-month period of waiting. And so that was really the time that we learned the most about waiting well. And I'm not even sure that we did it well then, but it certainly is something that we all are going to encounter at some point in life, where we realize that we can't make things happen on our own.
Well, and you're right. I mean, that has happened to all of us, and I'm sure that it affects all sorts of things, the relationships, our lives, all of those types of things. But let me ask you a question. Life on pause, okay? What did you learn from that? Obviously, you wrote the whole book on that, but the fact that we all experience those times where things just go into a pause, and most of the time we're not really happy about it. What are some of the things that made a difference for you from the standpoint of learning?
At about halfway through that 8-month period when my husband was without a job, I was reading scripture and I got to this place and it said, thus far, the Lord has helped us. And I started thinking about my history with God and all the times in my life that He was faithful and continues to be faithful. And so one of the things that helped me was just remembering my history with Him, that He has never failed me. He has never let me down. It may not be my time frame, but it may not occur when I want it to, but He has never let me down. And so that was one thing that became very clear to me during that time. The other thing is that I'm not in control. I think sometimes in our culture, we are conditioned to believe that if we try hard enough, we can make anything happen. But God's time frame is rarely ours, and He has reasons and purposes for the time frame that He allots to us. And it may not make sense to us at the time, but it's happening according to His plan and His purpose. Proverbs 19:21 says, people can make all kinds of plans, but only the Lord's plan happens.
All right, so let me ask you a question. I want to play devil's advocate for a minute, if that's okay.
Okay, sure. I hope I can answer.
Yeah, well, I hope so too. So, as you're talking about this, and certainly I believe everything that you're saying here. I also have that type of background. But let me ask you this question. I have noticed sometimes, there's a different level of relying on faith and relying on that higher power. And I see sometimes, because you mentioned, there's really nothing that we can do. And I beg to differ with you on that one, because I have seen people basically just eliminate any of their own actions and responsibility and just say that they are just totally relying on that higher power and He will take care of everything. And I think that gets a little bit in error from the standpoint of being able to really do what you need to do as much as you can do, certainly be proactive. Obviously, your husband lost his job a couple of times, but guess what? He was proactive enough to go find another one. So that's my question. Do you have to be careful about moving a little bit too far to one side of the pendulum and saying, all right, I just totally trust in the higher power and everything's going to, whatever happens is His will, versus trusting, but also recognizing that we have a responsibility to do what we can do also?
I think you're right on that because, sometimes when people go through a difficult season of life, they just are paralyzed. They basically give up and become very despondent and discouraged, and they don't do anything. But I don't think God expects that. I think that certainly, as you said, in my husband's case, he did have to be proactive about looking for another job. He couldn't sit there and just expect it to come to him. But at the same time, I think we have to realize that we do what we can, what is within our control, but at the same time, know that we can't always fix things or make things happen.
Okay, and that's true. So one of the areas that you really focus on is relationships. And one of the things you talk about is that relationships are challenging. And when these unexpected pauses occur, it can create all sorts of havoc. What are some of the things that you have learned that you'd like to share with the audience relative to how do we maintain those relationships, enhance those relationships, even at times of pause when there's tremendous stress in our lives, in one or the other or both?
I think one thing we have to realize is that we can't know what the other person is thinking or feeling, or the other people that are involved. I think, we have a tendency sometimes to presume and to place feelings or thoughts on other people, and almost kind of manufacture what they are thinking and feeling. And I think that's a mistake. I've experienced that sometimes with people in my life who decide they know what I'm thinking or feeling. And so I think, that is something we have to watch out for. You can't really know what the other person is dealing with or thinking about unless you ask. And so one of the things that I think is important in a life pause is to be honest. If it's between a husband and wife, then you need to be honest about your thoughts and feelings. If it's other friends or family members or whatever, you need to be honest with them, carefully honest with them, because some people don't respond well to that. A lot of it depends on personality types. There are some people that are just very private. There are some people that tell everything, and are not thoughtful of others with their expressions of with their words and their actions. And so some of it depends on personality types. I think it's important also to just kind of control emotion. That there are a lot of emotions that go under the surface. You want to, if you're dealing with something, I think you can express it in a way that is not overt and hurtful, but at the same time, don't stuff it all. You're going to deal with anger is one of the main things that people deal with when they're in a life pause. Another is jealousy. It's a similar situation, going back to what I said about the infertility. It's hard to look at other people moving forward with their lives when you're sidelined. You're waiting, and you look at other people and see that they're moving forward, and it's hard to accept without some little bit of resentment or jealousy that you're stuck and they're not.
Well, and you bring up a couple of really interesting points. One is personality, really understanding someone else's personality and understanding your own personality, because based on that style and behavior that we have, we're going to respond in a different way. We're going to talk in a different way. If you happen to be that high D, if we're going to use the disc, for instance, you're going to be a high D, you're coming across really strong. Whereas if you've got someone that's an S, they're a little bit more meek, and that strong communication can be actually a little bit impinging on them. So you've got that. And I want to talk about that a little bit more, but also emotions. And you talk about anger, and anger obviously is an emotion, but the question is, what do you find triggers those emotions, and how do you help someone, first of all, to understand that their responses to certain situations truly are based on emotion, and what are the emotions and what are those initial trigger points within their subconscious mind that are triggering those emotions, which may not be the emotions that they'd really prefer to have. What are your thoughts on that? And have you done some research on that? I would assume you have.
Well, I think we have to expect emotion to be part of a life pause. So much that happens to us in life is emotional. I mean, we're emotional beings. That's very much who we are. But I think we have a heightened sense of impatience when we're in a season of waiting. Sometimes we'll have an angry outburst, and it's targeted at a person that doesn't deserve it. Is not involved at all. And we've, in dealing with it, it just pours out, and we don't expect it, and we're surprised, but at the same time, it hurts the person that we aim it at. We're really upset about something else, but we aim it at the wrong target. And then, I think that our emotions are more on the surface when we're going through a life pause. And so, we've got to realize that that's going to be the case, and find ways of dealing with it. Some people are very successful with journaling and being real honest on paper about what they're dealing with. And others, benefit from talking to someone. And I don't think I'm an advocate for people going to counseling if they're dealing with a difficult life situation, or if you have a trusted friend that you can share with and they will respond with wisdom. That is also, a good way to go, but you want it to be someone who will keep what you say in confidence, and can be a good sounding board, not just to agree with you, but to speak wisdom into what you're going through.
Well, and you talk a little bit about relinquishing control. And also, as you talk about blaming someone else, I think that gets to be very interesting, especially what we're seeing today here in the United States. There is so much blame going on, and you see such horrible activities occurring, and people blaming this person and that person and this political party and that political party and whatever. And I think even in our own personal lives, things happen and we automatically try to find someone to blame rather than taking responsibility ourselves. Because sometimes, we don't like to realize this, but sometimes our actions, well, not sometimes, always our actions have consequences. Sometimes they're great consequences, but sometimes they're not. But why is it that we tend to want to blame someone else for what's going on in our lives rather than accepting that we have the major responsibility for that, as well as you mentioned, sometimes life just happens and we have to have the faith that that's okay because someone's watching over us at a much higher level.
I think it's human nature to blame someone else. It goes all the way back to Adam and Eve, when God confronted them about their sin, and Adam basically blamed Eve and also God. This woman that you gave me messed up, and but he made the choice to also be involved in that sin, that to go against what God had instructed. So it's part of human nature to blame other people, because if we look at ourselves, if we take an honest look at ourselves, sometimes we don't like what we see. And so it's much easier to place the shortcomings on someone else and say, this wouldn't have happened to me if it hadn't been for so-and-so.
Okay, so you bring up an interesting point. We don't like what we see when we take that internal look at ourselves. How do we begin to like what we see? How do we change that in a way that we begin to really love ourselves and like what we see and have that ability to relinquish those emotions and that control that they have over us, so that we continue to move forward with a positive attitude and joy and happiness in our lives, even in spite of those pauses that occur?
I think you can begin to do that by making some small changes, taking some steps. I'll just give a real personal example. I've always been very outspoken, and within recent years, I've realized that often without meaning to, I have wounded other people with my words. And so I have become more aware of that and people's personalities, and that some personalities just do not do well with being blunt. And I have taken steps to be kinder and more affirming to people, instead of pointing out shortcomings, pointing out negatives about other people, to point out positives. And I think as you begin to look at yourself and see some things that you maybe don't like about yourself, if you take some positive steps to change that, then you can really start to move forward realizing that you do have the ability to do something different than what your personality tends toward.
Well, and I smile as you're talking about that. I remember a number of years ago, I was doing some of that introspective work, and I realized that one of the things that, and I probably have a similar personality that you have from the standpoint, I'm willing to offer my opinion. I'm just willing to say as it is. And finally, someone said to me, Doug, realize that anytime you offer your opinion, and obviously, your opinion's great, they're trying to be kind to me, but they said, but sometimes people take that as criticism. And it's like, so what do I do? And, for me, it was like, my kids laugh at me now. Do you want me to listen to you, or do you want my opinion? And that way they can say, I just want you to listen to me, no opinions, or, you know what, I really would appreciate your opinion. But the fact that you ask for that, I think makes a big difference. And as you say, some personalities are just willing to share and give their opinions and thinking that that's really helpful, when in fact, when you have people who have those personalities and behavioral traits of being very sensitive to what they would consider to be criticism, all of a sudden you have created an issue that didn't need to be created. So I appreciate what you're saying there. So how do we do that? How do we communicate with those people whom we come in contact with, particularly those who are loved ones and so forth, to where we really find that relationship on a positive note, the communication is really clear? How do we do that in a way that we really enhance those relationships?
This is hard for me, but I found that if I listen more than I talk, then things often go better.
Well,
So-
and that, yeah, go ahead.
So if you're constantly thinking about what you're going to say next to the person that you're having a conversation with, then you're not really listening. And if you want to let somebody really express themselves, then don't interject a similar story. Oh, I had the same situation with something. Just listen, just be quiet and see what they have to say. And then later, just, be wise about how you respond. You don't always have to lend some sort of information that you think will be helpful. You can just say, I'm sorry you're going through this difficult time. I will keep you in my thoughts and prayers. And it doesn't always have to be a situation where you feel you have to fix them.
Okay, well, and you talk a little bit about addressing emotions. So as you start to observe within yourself, and we all do this, as we start to observe an outcome that we really don't want, and if we're aware enough to realize that, you know what, we are causing that because of emotions that are coming up within us, how do you address those negative, those hurtful emotions that really don't have to be there? How do you address them in a way that you start to either minimize them or move them to the side and create healthier emotions?
I think the first step is to admit it. I mean, a lot of times we just don't want to admit that we're mad or that we're jealous or whatever. And so I think we just have to admit to ourselves that that's something we're dealing with. And certainly in the writing community, there are times that I deal with jealousy, just watching other people who just seem to have one success after another. And then perhaps your journey in the writing world is a lot slower. And so, I think you just have to admit to yourself, I got to realize that my journey is different from theirs. And we're not all on the same path, and we're not all created to do the same things and in the same way. And so, admitting that to yourself that you're having those emotions, and then especially if you're dealing with jealousy, just learn to rejoice with other people in their success. And that's hard to do. But if you begin the process, it does become easier. And when you're dealing with anger, if you can really look internally and see why you're angry, what's at the heart of that. And just, it takes some dissection, and that's hard to do. A lot of us are not comfortable with looking at ourselves and really seeing honestly some of the things that we're dealing with.
Well, and it takes a lot of courage. That's one of the things I've talked about a bit, that we can be aware of that. And as you say, we got to admit it, we can be aware of it, but then the courage to actually go in and do something. The saying that, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. I think that if we're looking at our lives and realizing, what, this is not what I want, we have to hold a mirror up in front of ourselves and go, okay, I am at cause here. What is it that is causing that? And being able to then be courageous enough, as you say, because it is scary to go in and really look at what is causing that. Because I think a lot of us are very insecure. We have that sense that I'm not good enough and all of that type of thing. And I think it's tough for them to understand that, what, you are good enough. You are good enough. It's just that you've got some of these peripheral things that are embedded in your subconscious that you can literally, ultimately, if you're courageous enough to do it. And as you say, sometimes it takes therapy, sometimes it just takes a good friend, whatever that happens to be, to really be able to overcome that. So when you see these life pauses, for instance, with you and your husband, how were those life pauses beneficial for your relationship?
I think we learn to talk on a deeper level, or maybe more honest with ourselves. I think sometimes when you're just, rocking along doing life, you tend to kind of just get into your own little separate worlds of doing this and that. And then you see each other in the evenings or whatever. And sometimes we're tired and we just, we don't talk. We just kind of zone out. But during that time, I think we were able to talk about some things on a deeper level and express some fears and some frustrations and encourage each other. And so I think, there are positives in that, and that maybe you just come to a deeper understanding of each other, that maybe some things that you never shared because they're fears, or you feel that you're making yourself too vulnerable or whatever. And so, I definitely think that was one of the positives that we experienced. And then for us personally, just being able to pray together and to learn a deeper trust in God to move us forward, and realize that if things didn't turn out the way we hoped, if he didn't find another job, that God would provide for us. And that just to know that we had to take it one step at a time, one day at a time, and not look too far down the road and not project a really difficult scenario of the future, but just wait to see what God was going to do.
Well, and you bring up an interesting point there in those relationships, as you start to communicate, as you start to really open up in a way that you normally would not, which is a great deal of fear, because you just don't want to be judged and that type of thing. But how do we as individuals learn to become non-judgmental? Because it's so automatic that when someone says something to us, and particularly in those close relationships, there's almost an immediate sense of wanting to jump to a judgment and a conclusion, rather than being able to listen without any judgment. What have you found were the secrets for you, as you listen to your husband, as your husband listened to you, to eliminate that judgment, so that in fact you could enjoy that sense of connection and oneness, not only with yourselves, but as you say, with the Spirit?
I think one thing is, you're saying judgment, but for me, I think a lot of times it's defensiveness. Just when someone is very honest with you, feeling that all of a sudden your defenses are up. And so, I personally have had to learn to lower my defenses and realize that when someone says something to me that ruffles my feathers, that I need to be able to just listen to that and try to absorb it without responding in a defensive way. And certainly we are in a culture that is judgmental, that is blaming. And so we have to learn to be counterculture, which is hard because we're surrounded with that. And the idea of waiting in our culture is not seen as a positive. So when we're dealing with relationships, I think to try to minimize defensiveness as much as possible, and judging what the other person is implying. And again, we're back to the idea that you can't know what a person is thinking or feeling without asking them. So,
Well, that's
ahead.
true. In fact, I remember a story in my own family where one of my children came home and had been really verbally made to feel very little. And because he hadn't accomplished something that, quote, he was supposed to have accomplished. And the adult that was overseeing all of that kind of led into him from what I could figure out. And as I listened to that, I thought back to what you were saying, and personalities and emotions, and where are we on that emotional level. And the one thing I shared with him is I said, you know what? It's not about you. And I think that helps to eliminate some of that defensiveness when you realize that, you know what, when someone says something to you in a way, that's how they communicate. And that has everything to do with them. It has nothing to do with you. And I think that as we can begin to understand that, all of a sudden that defensiveness goes away, because it isn't about me. Whatever you're saying is coming from you, and it has nothing to do with me. So let me ask you this question. In fact, there's a scripture that you had included in your bio that I want to read for the audience, because I really love what it says, and it kind of goes along with this whole concept of inspire vision and lifting lives. Let me put on my glasses so I can actually see it. He comes alongside us when we go through hard times, and before you know it, he brings us alongside someone else who is going through hard times so that we can be there for that person just as God was there for us. What are your thoughts on that? Obviously, that seems to be a very important point for you.
Well, I have learned over time that not to waste a hard thing in my life. There's a tendency to, once you're beyond whatever that life pause is, or that grief, or that difficulty, to just kind of go, it's over, and move forward. But what I've seen is the things that I've experienced, God has brought me into the path of others who were dealing with a similar difficulty. And I am wasting what I went through and what I learned if I don't come alongside that person and say, let me help you. I've walked this path before. And if you would like for me to, I would be glad to encourage you on this journey. My mother had vascular dementia in the later years of her life, and it was very difficult. And I have a cousin now who is dealing with a similar situation. And I talked to her daughter and I said, I've walked this path, and I would be happy to come alongside you and encourage and support you in this journey, because I've lived it and I know what it's like. And she was grateful. And so, I think that as we learn in life, if God is going to provide opportunities for us to encourage others, And we miss those opportunities if we're not willing to. I know sometimes when people go through something really difficult, they just say, I can't talk about that. I can't, and that's okay. That's okay if it's too painful for them. But if you are able and you see opportunity, I think it's, you're amiss if you don't take advantage of those opportunities.
Well, and that's a different perspective on these pauses. When you look at what goes on in our lives, if we pause even within the pause and start to consider, what are we grateful for? What are the lessons that I'm learning from this? And then once we can understand that, recognize that, I'm grateful for those lessons. It takes away a lot of that negative emotion.
Mhm.
And then, as you say, when we have that going on, then we're able to look at other people and recognize when they're going through something similar and be there to offer a helping hand, be there to offer a friendship, be there to just help lift their lives just a little bit. Because a lot of times I think when people are really suffering, they just need a friend that
Mhm.
understands what they're doing and what they're
Right.
going through.
Well, I've certainly found that to be true. I co-authored a book for people who lost a loved one to suicide. And I learned so much in writing that book, because what I learned is that those survivors, those who were left behind following a suicide death, really struggle with their grief because no one knows how to talk to them. And no one is willing to listen because they're not really sure what they believe about suicide. And there's still so much stigma attached to it that people don't approach those loved ones and come beside them and say, I know you're grieving and I know it's hard. I've never experienced this exact grief, but I want you to know that I care about you. And I've had opportunity to minister to those people who've lost a loved one to suicide, and it happens all the time. And one of their greatest heartaches is that people do not respond to them the way other people do to grieving families, just simply because they don't know what to say. So, I think it's important for us to realize that even if you're not real sure what to say, just let the other person know that you care and that you're thinking about them and praying for them.
Makes a big difference. Well, and so if you could share, Candy, what the message of that Life on Pause book is all about with the audience, what would you say that is? What would be the message of your book to people?
There are positives in waiting. If you're open to learning in a season of waiting, then you will benefit from it. And, those are probably the two main things, is just to find a positive in the season of waiting, to trust God, and realize that we're all going to deal with waiting. And if we can be patient through that time and learn from it, then it will not be a wasted season in our lives.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for being on the show, Candy.
Thank
This has
you.
been a wonderful discussion. I really appreciate it. And how do people find your book?
Well, it's available on Amazon and other online booksellers, and also at your local bookstore. If you have a local store, certainly you can ask for it there. If they don't have it in stock, they can order it.
Wonderful. Now, let me ask you one other question. You're a writer, obviously. You're a blogger. You're doing all of those things. Do you help other people learn how to write?
I do. I teach at writing conferences, and I enjoy doing that. I really do love to, to instruct and teach. I have done some editing, helping people to, polish their work. And it's very, when I started out, I was thankful for the people who were further along the path than I was and could give me instruction. And so I like to do that for others too.
Oh, that's wonderful. And that, for those that want to write, it's not easy.
Right.
It's not easy.
Correct.
So having someone like you, God, how would they find you if they had the desire to have you help them a bit with their writing?
CandyArrington.com. And there's information on there that you can contact me through my website. I will be teaching, for those of you who are in the South, I'll be teaching at the Asheville Christian Writers Conference in February. You can look that up online, and I'd be glad to meet you and get to know you.
Oh, wonderful. Well, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank
Really
you.
appreciate it. Folks, thanks for listening. And I hope that you get the message today that, we all have pauses in our life. And if we can just realize that, we can look for the blessings of that so that we can then touch other lives, it makes a big difference. So have a wonderful week. Have a wonderful holiday season. Look forward to having you join us again.